So Nation, a few months ago we talked about the new Coheed and Cambria album, the Afterman, Ascension. Well, now here we are, just a couple of months later, talking about part 2 of that saga, Descension, in a very, hopefully, very soon, time to Winter Sun style fashion. The main difference between those two is, of course, the fact that this is part of a greater story which has been going on ever since Coheed and Cambria started writing and releasing music, the Amory Wars saga. And what is interesting about it is that the Afterman saga, this two-part, I guess, storyline that you want to call it, would be the prequel to the prequel, which means that this actually precedes the events of Year of the Black Rainbow. So, in a way, we've gotten this whole story in a very weird order, and it seems like as they've gone along over the past few years, they've kind of written even more in the back lore, something even more further back into the chronology. That way, it really builds an expansive universe. And of course, the comic books that have been released kind of associate themselves with that, and once you have everything in a linear fashion, it makes sense, I suppose, but that's really in the eye of the obsessed fan. But whenever we listen to this album as compared to their previous effort, the first part of this album, you could almost consider this to be a little bit of a softer portion of the duality of the two-parter that we have. And I totally forgot to mention that Stone Sour's doing this too, so there's going to be a lot of part 2s this year, even in the movie business. Actually, in the movie business, there's going to be some part 3s too, so it's basically the year of the sequel. It's kind of strange. You know, the sequel never ends up being as good as the original, but in music it's a little bit different. With this, we have a little bit more of an expansive taste of the catalog. We have Coheed and Cambria preserving their signature sound and tracks such as, Two's my favorite one, and Dark Side of Me. Some of the same elements that you perhaps have heard in some of their earlier work. However, it's being represented with a little bit more of a softer ideal behind it. There's going to be a little bit more of a softer resonation. Now, there's only one key entity, Extraction, on this album. There was 4, if you remember, on part 1. And this one is Sentry the Defiant, which is actually speaking about a situation from Vic the Butcher back on part number 1. So, in a way, the 5th Extraction is a tie-in to a previous Extraction on the first record. And the way that this ties in together is that Sentry is the person who ratted out Vic. Vic was a notorious individual, high-ranking official who did many notorious deeds and basically just had absolutely no regard for human life and threatened those who threatened to basically threatened anybody that if they exposed him for what he had done, he would just do terrible things to their family and basically hunt them and kill them, a la Taken. Okay, not really, but this is kind of the second part of the story from the opposite point of view, from the point of view of the gentleman who basically decided to rat him out, who basically did not give a damn about that and did, in fact, pay the price. And there's a secondary storyline that's going on throughout this whole album about our main character kind of getting deeper and deeper into this whole world, where he's kind of going into these different extraction points and seeing different individuals and the lives that they led, and basically getting sucked deeper and deeper into this universe. So it's kind of an interesting dual storyline going on, where you get essentially tales from around the universe within the tale itself. So it's kind of giving you an overview of a couple of keynote characters from the earlier stages of the whole storyline, which kind of gives the whole idea a little bit more depth. Now, musically, I have noticed a couple of keynote changes. I mentioned that there's definitely a little bit more of a softness that pervades on this. However, the one thing I kind of liked a lot was with Number City, track number 4 on the album. I felt a lot of a really weird Red Hot Chili Peppers vibe going on, only with a little bit more of an electronic and a little bit more of a technological element behind it. So instead of it being really crossbred with that whole funky idea with the modern alternative sound that they really helped create, you see a little bit more with the electronic idea, but still that same little funk sort of exposes itself, and you feel almost like you're in a really futuristic Red Hot Chili Peppers song, which is a nice, neat little kind of change-up. I feel that the terminology of progressive alternative, the genre of progressive alternative, to really discuss and kind of lump in Coheed and Cambria is extremely fair on this album, because we've seen moments where they have definitely borderline on the progressive metal category, where they've had a very huge metallic element to them. No World for Tomorrow is a very good example. You hear that a lot on that album, and even in some of their earlier works. With Year of the Black Rainbow and everything that has come after it, it's definitely become an idea that's kind of toned down a little bit. It's not something where that metallic side really shows up nearly as much as it did on the one or two previous albums that had come before it. I mean, remember songs like Welcome Home, while they did get a lot of extensive airplay on radio stations, also were probably one of the heavier songs that were being played on those same radio stations for the time frame. Of course, that's changed with the advent of this newer generation of music that has really kind of incorporated a lot more hard elements. Now, with that said, it's kind of ironic that the radio has become a little bit heavier and a little bit harder, and Coheed and Cambria have kind of taken a step back a little bit, kind of going more with that traditional progressive alternative route, and really there's not too much in the way of, just twists and turns that you notice with previous albums where it seems like it's all of that progressive. However, the one thing that really just juts out at you is the fact that this is now album, number 6 or 7 that they have been dedicated to this one storyline. I mean, this is something where it has been literally their entire being, and it has created this universe that has, quite honestly, taken over this this band's fan base. This is something where I'm sure they themselves have written a lot of fan related fiction, or have kind of investigated the whole idea of this concept and kind of taken their own little play on it, so to speak, trying to keep as true to the lore as possible, of course. Overall, as far as the album is concerned, I do think that it's a little bit weaker than the first part of this duality. I think that this one not so much has the weaker material on it, but I just don't feel as engrossed in the storyline. Whereas with the first part, since there were so many kind of visuals into other lives, I felt a little bit more in touch. I almost felt like I was experiencing these experiences of the main character through a first-person perspective, as opposed to feeling a little bit more distant and almost like I'm watching a film, you know what I'm saying? Which is something that is in the works. They're in the works for an Amory Wars movie. But, with that said alone, I think musically also, it's something where I felt a little bit more detached to the material here, and it's not necessarily because it's been softened up a bit. It just seemed as though this was a little bit weaker by comparison to part number 1. I feel like songs such as Number City, Key Entry Extraction, Part 5 were very, very good. Gravity's Union was a pretty impressive midway point track. But whenever we got into tracks such as Away We Go and Dark Side of Me and Iron Fist, I started to feel just a little bit distanced by it. Now, the very first single that they had originally intended for this album was The Hard Sell, which is not bad, but at the same time, after coming off of that first-person ideal from Key Entry Extraction 5, it just didn't exactly hit me the same way. I know that they're trying to progress with the latter part of the story and kind of get us to that climax point, where we go back to the main character instead of visualizing other, secondary characters in this whole lore. But that was the part that I really enjoyed, so maybe that's just on me. But overall, I'd have to give the album a 7. I mean, musically, it's very, very well done. At the same time, it just felt... it almost felt like I was just not quite as engrossed or, as occupied in this album as I have been with some in the past. And, I'd like to kind of see other elements of this universe. I'd kind of like to see a big-time... the funny thing is, I'd almost like to see a big-time concept album based around some of the characters that they talked about in these key entity extractions. I really think that that would be a great album idea, especially the tales of Vic the Butcher and Century to Defiant, because that right there is a real tale of just a menace, a real antagonist, and then there's a reluctant protagonist that is almost like, in a way, to the antagonist, he's like an anti-hero, because he's looking to expose him for his misdeeds and just doesn't give a crap, basically ignores the warning that was given to everybody, and instead just kind of does what he wants. And the only problem with it is that there's no real happy ending to it, because he is punished for basically stepping on, Vic's foot. But overall, like I said, about 7 out of 10 on the album itself. I'm really kind of excited to see where they go next, because we've gotten a prequel, and then we've gotten the prequel to the prequel, So, unless we're just going to keep going backwards, I think it might be time for us to go forward a little bit. So, what they do next is really up in the air, but I'll always be very interested in this band because of the huge lore that has surrounded their albums, based around the story that they themselves have concocted. So, good job to the guys, and I'll see you guys next time.